This is Open Door with Vince Robinson. In-depth conversations with people who are making a difference in the lives of others here and around the world. Culture is at the heart of who you are. Know your culture, find yourself on Open Door with Vince Robinson.
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to another edition of Open Door with Vince Robinson. My guest today is the author of Popadelic, The Ink of Rebellion, Crisis of Realms, the books of Popadelic. He's also a visual artist who has participated in the Transformative Art Fund project called Impart 216, and he is an activist in the community dealing with issues involving our children and their mental health and other things. So we want to welcome aboard Open Door with Vince Robinson, Mr. Rickey Lewis. Rickey, how are you today?
I'm good, Vince. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Doing quite well and happy to have you aboard. Tell us about this book that you've written and how folks can obtain it.
Well, I guess I should lead with how they can obtain it. Shameless plug. It's available on Amazon Kindle, and it's in ebook form as well as paperback. I don't have a hard copy yet, but it can be seen and or bought on Amazon.
Okay. And Popadelic, that's a word that I heard for the very first time when I saw that you had this book out. What is Popadelic?
Well, it's a made-up word. It's not, I don't think it's in the dictionary. I never really looked to see. But I've been using the word Popadelic for decades. It started with a series of comics that I was writing. And the book itself actually started as a graphic novel. And I had been developing some of these characters again for quite a while before it culminated into this novel called Popadelic. But Popadelic kind of sort of means pop first or something to that effect. And the idea of the characters of the book is that they pop from scene to scene, from scenario to scenario. It's a travelogue, and it's about basically introducing these particular characters. There's an interaction, and then they move on, and then another character appears. You get a sense of what the characters do and how they interact at that moment, but then they literally move off to their own genre, their own space. So it's essentially a travelogue.
Okay. What inspired you to come up with this concept?
Well, again, like I mentioned, I had started writing a graphic novel and developing characters. As a matter of fact, in the early 80s. I started to do that, and later, toward the mid-80s, I met with a musician, and it was going to be called Popadelic 4, and Popadelic 4 was actually a musical play, and we developed that from my characters and took it to New York and tried to sell it off Broadway and so forth and so on to no avail. But that gives you an idea how long I've been working with this concept. It's been several years. But the graphic design portion of it is what inspired me to write the novel. It's called a metafiction, which means it's a novel. It's dystopian, by the way. A novel about characters writing a graphic novel.
Yes. Well, as I look at the cover, it seems to be pretty intense just based on the character that I'm looking at. I can only imagine what the text would be to go along with these very graphic images that you have created. Can you talk about what inspired you to begin looking at being a visual artist?
Well, it takes me back a lot longer than 40 years. Excuse me. I have never, to the best of my knowledge, I don't ever remember not trying to draw something. and I developed it elementary school. I was always drawing something and creating something. And oddly enough, as when I was a child, I developed a character, and it was a bull character. I hadn't named it yet, and I made a paper mache of it, and so forth and so on. And just interesting that one of the, if not the first character. As a matter of fact, it was the first character I came up with, Popadelic, was realized, and that is the bull you see on the cover. That particular bull with the golden horns. It actually has a phoenix for a tail.
Yes, I see that.
So that was the first one, and I developed that one. I was working as a security guard, and then as an adult, I'm skipping up to I was older, and I would always, because when I was not in school, when I was working part time to make ends meet, I would always take a night shift security guard so I could take my sketch pad with me and draw at from 12, the 12 o'clock shift to 8 in the morning or something like that. And I came up with this bull character, and it was just inspired by realizing, I don't know what language I can use on your show, but realizing bull stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it started. And I began to write more and more about it. So when the character there would be bull stuff for whatever reason, then the character would pop into the scene and charge towards it. That's how it all started. That was my Mickey Mouse on a napkin moment.
Mm. So it sounds like you had a certain level of consciousness at an early age where you had this idea that perhaps authority or things that didn't make sense needed to be confronted.
Yes, that's true.
Interesting.
That is true, and that's part of my social advocacy as an artist. It's a social critique through juxtaposition, where I actively investigate societal fractures and class and economic disparity, marginalism, and juxtaposed against people who have diamonds and silver spoons. That's part of a particular series I'm working on now as well. Mm-hmm. But I've always been conscious of those kinds of things and never really, as far back as I can remember, even when I began to learn how to paint and or draw as a freshman, the themes that I would explore, I remember quite a while ago, one of the themes I explored was the relationship between Native Americans and Caucasian Americans. And it was an image of a Native American, facial frontal image of a Native American with full headdress, with one close-up, with one tear coming out of its eye. And that tear was in the form of a white man. And I did these things not to get attention. It's just what inspired me. As a matter of fact, most of, if not all of the things, except when I did a little commercial work, everything I did for me was always what I was inspired to do. Not for recognition. It just was what I felt like, what I was called to do or what I was supposed to do, how I felt. And it's still to this day, that's what's going on. And likewise with the book. Mm-hmm. It's a way to, give some attention to a variety of things.
Yes. So. And when you describe that image of the Native American and the tear that had a white person in it, it seems as though you had an idea of the counter narrative. Growing up in America and watching the television shows and seeing the cowboys versus the Indians, and the Indians were always depicted as the bad person, it just seems as though you had an awareness of the injustice of that narrative. And even as a young person, you wanted to create a different one.
Exactly. Exactly. And it wasn't necessarily done with a great deal of research. It was the stimulus. It's just what was obvious. And, and that prevailing theme was just that one in particular was obvious. Another point of my advocacy is it's not necessarily black person versus white person. My Colored Woman series, for example, is called Colored Women because there are a variety of women of color. And I called it, I guess, as a hook, Colored Women, because sometimes when a African American or black artist says colored woman, you think of all of black women. But that's not what the Colored Women series is about. As a matter of fact, it's where a solitary figure is honored and magnified through color and composition. It's not at all just simply black women.
Yes.
I really mean to minimize that, but it's not what I was inspired to do.
Right. Well, when we talk about color today, it has a different context than it did back in the day. You know, there was a time when they referred to us as colored, you know, and now that definition kind of expanded to include everybody who has a certain level of melanin in their skin. But, you know, when you think about it, we're all brothers and sisters anyway. So, you know, perhaps it's appropriate to expand that. I'm curious, you know, based on this
kind of world, I guess.
Yes. Based on what you've spoken about in terms of how far you go back with your art, was there ever a point where you needed to get formal training, or was it something that was just instinctive to you?
Well, it was kind of a natural progression to get formal training. Like I said, I always gravitated towards art. I don't ever remember not drawing something. And I would always gravitate towards that. Junior high school. As a matter of fact, we got through the senior year, I completed all my electives. So the only thing I think pretty much I did was a particular second floor of Glenville High School, where I spent all my time in the art rooms. And then I majored in fine art and graphic design when I went away to college. So it was kind of a natural progression. And I did learn some things, obviously, but it wasn't the end all. I didn't care as much about being a master's, getting a master's degree in art for a few reasons. I just cared about whether I had some of the principles and things like that, because it's funny. I don't remember who made the quote. I think it was Warhol, who said art was easy until you started to learn what you were doing. And that's, I can relate to that, because when you don't know necessarily what you're doing, there's a freer attitude towards it. You're not thinking about structure, composition, and all of the tools that you may need to learn in order to get a degree. But that's not to minimize that. That was just my personal perspective at the time. I didn't graduate from the University of Akron. That's where I started. But I ended up going back to school several times and finally getting a diploma from the Art Institute of Pittsburgh. And it was more of a bucket list thing to do, to be honest, than anything else. So I got the piece of paper, I got a cap and a gown, and a bill.
So in essence, that piece of paper didn't validate you on a personal level, but in the eyes of the world, it did. Yes.
No, it did not validate me on a personal level, but it did, I guess, give, like you mentioned, some credibility. So when you put that on your bio or something, people may say, well, I guess he knows what he's doing.
Well, you know, it's kind of ironic that we have this conversation, because sometimes it takes those things, those academic accomplishments, to validate you, to position you to be able to receive funds as an artist, and then you also mentioned working security and being able to use that position to facilitate your art. I'm just wondering, as you state that, were you able to emerge from college to make a living as an artist, or did you have to do what some do, subsidize their artistic career by having gainful employment?
I would go with the latter, gainful employment. I've always had gainful employment, even though there were times when I literally lived off of my artwork. And there were, late 70s, I guess, the early 80s. And even if you consider working when I worked in Meister Grimm Designs, I was still essentially living off my artistic skills, but it wasn't fine art. So I guess you could consider that as well. And then also in the 90s, I also just literally lived on and worked making artwork. I used to go to the Art Institute here in Cleveland. They had a clearinghouse where there were jobs available, and I would just literally go in there and get, especially a job that I could do, and even some that I couldn't do. Mm-hmm. I would pull those off the boards and figure out a way to do them. And when I stopped doing that to do counseling work, it was one of the major reasons was my daughter was coming to live with me, and I had to have a particular stability. So that's when I got a job as a counselor, an outreach worker and counselor in 1999.
What prepared you for that job?
Well, a lot of it was life experience. After you get into the particular where I happened to work with a place called Project Safe, there was training involved. I had to do that. I was hired, and then it took months of training in order to be to go out into the field. And there are, from the Ohio Credentialing Board, there are steps you need to take to be, for instance, I'm a chemical dependency counselor and a certified prevention specialist. And you have to earn that through hours in the field and certain credit hours through study. You can also do it in school, but you have to be able to do that in order to work in the field, basically, because whoever you work for, they can't bill unless the person facilitating the thing is credentialed.
So since you brought up the counseling piece, you have a website called I Care About Myself.
Care About My Life.
I Care About My Life. Could you talk about the genesis of that and what you're accomplishing within that paradigm?
Well, never, ever not doing art. Because when I worked as a counselor, I also was painting murals and freelancing. Again, I've never not made art. I combined the two. That's how that came about. It's formerly called, the nonprofit is called I Care About My Life and I Care About Your Life. That is the name of the nonprofit. And I combined the two because I was actually doing both while I was either facilitating a group or creating art that was informed by my work as an outreach worker and a counselor. It still is, as a matter of fact. So that's why the social critique and through juxtaposition. But that's how the name was developed. Because, and also, one of the things that happens with recovery as a drug counselor is that you have to care about yourself before you can help others. It's also inspired by when you're on a plane and you get the spiel about when the oxygen mask comes down, you have to put it on yourself first before you even put it on your child. So those were a couple of things that inspired the name. But the logo is in a circle. So if you read it left to right or right to left, it will say, I care about my life and I care about your life, or I care about your life and I care about my life. For the logo design, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And what I do with that, it's there so far been 3 cohorts. One of the cohorts is the relationship between teenagers and law enforcement. The next one was helping to change the stigma of opioid use. And the third one was HIV prevention, where I was hired as a outreach worker and prevention specialist. Each one was funded, had different funding sources, but each one of them also involved a method of engagement where the participant, the interactive engagement between the participant and another maybe polarized entity, would create artwork for an exhibition. So, and again, these things are hand in hand with what I do as an artist. It helps to inform, it helps to inspire what I do personally as an artist. So there's only maybe a half a degree of separation.
Yeah, so you kind of beat me to the question, because I was going to ask you how art works its way into that paradigm. So you have young people who are creating art as a result of their experience within the program?
It's young people for the particular cohort, young people, especially Black young people, and their interaction with law enforcement. In this particular case, it was the 3rd District Police Department, along with the Boys and Girls Club at East Tech High School. Had a number of sessions where they interacted. And some of these interactions, well, some, not all, but interactions are on the website. You can see what they came up with. It wasn't, I just facilitated and helped to guide individuals to help them create the image, because it's an abstract concept. If I were to ask the layperson, I guess, what does a positive interaction between law enforcement and police look like? Literally, what does that look like? If you had to take a picture of that or draw that, what does that look like? Some of the answers are vague, but they're not complete enough to create an image. So that's where I come in to help to facilitate, so they can come up with thumbnails and decide, well, maybe a positive relationship is one of the young men came up with shaking hands with a police officer while we're cooking. So we staged that, took a picture of it, and that's what we produce. They also have to describe it. With the exhibition, there's an image of what the prompt was, and then there is a description next to it as part of the exhibition. Similarly, with the stigma change, that happened to be a mural. Those were funded by the Alcohol, Drug, and Mental Health Board of Cuyahoga County. It was a series of 2 different murals, and there was also evidence-based curriculum along with that, and individuals helped design the mural, and I facilitated painting it. And there was a building on 55th and Euclid that's been torn down. The other one still exists on 162nd and Curitas. And then finally, HIV prevention, which is when I started outreach work. And the story behind that is I was painting a mural, and the woman that I was dating at the time knew of a job opportunity, so I applied, not knowing what exactly it was. But the fact that I had some college and some experience, I guess, was why I was hired as a outreach worker to give away condoms and paraphernalia and test people for HIV. At the time, I was given the option to do that or interview people and give them a stipend. Interview people who happen to have some substance abuse issues and give them a stipend. And I said, well, if I give these people stipend, they're probably going to go out and buy drugs, so I'll take the other one.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. And then again, all of these things, you as an artist, you are who you are with your experience. You especially your life, whatever your life experience is. So consequently, because I've been doing those kinds of things and the thousands of people that I've either talked to or interviewed, they all inspire what I'm doing. It's also one of the reasons I could see the juxtaposition between rich and poor. And I really am, that's the next series. So really excited about it. Can't wait to get to it.
Next series, are you talking about next series of a graphic novel or a book or a collection of art?
The collection of art. The book, each one of the characters, getting back to the book, each one of the characters would spin off into their own book. That's why it's the books of Popadelic, because this is just the introduction.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So I want to rewind a little bit because I'm always curious about folks who grow up in Cleveland and end up in other cities and the experiences that they have. You talked about your time in Pittsburgh. How did you find Pittsburgh while you were there?
Well, I didn't spend time in Pittsburgh. The Pittsburgh diploma was online.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I didn't spend time to go to the Institute of Pittsburgh. It was actually online.
Okay, I see.
I visited Pittsburgh, but
yeah,
I spent more time in Detroit.
Okay.
Than I did Pittsburgh. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, talk to me about Detroit because I've spent some time there as well.
I found Detroit to be very cultural compared to my experience here. Detroit is where I went to the Fox Theater and saw the Three Tenors, for instance. Detroit was there seemed to be more camaraderie, similar to my experience in Birmingham, Alabama, amongst African Americans. The upward mobility just seemed to be there just seemed to be more of that when I was spent a lot of time in Detroit. The Detroit Institute of Art is as we speak is renowned as one of the best in the country, and it's very interesting. I ended up back in Detroit. I'm just kind of fast forwarding a little bit because I'm being represented by a gallery in Detroit that has an exhibition called, another shameless plug, Pigmented in Chicago, Illinois, in a week. So yeah, a little bit of time in Detroit, did Chicago, how grandiose they were compared to Cleveland, as well as Atlanta, how much larger they are, and how much more experiences there are. I liked Miami. I liked New York. Comparatively, how I settled here, mostly family, because of my daughter and so forth, in the domestic situation I was in, is why I spent most of the time here. Not as an excuse, I'm not angry at that, but I think I would have thrived more in a larger city, or faster, sooner.
When you talk about a domestic situation, was it a situation where you being an artist was detrimental to the relationship?
No, it wasn't. That wasn't the domestic situation. It was custody, things like that. Excuse me. My daughter, as I mentioned before, came to live with me. She in 1999, and it's one of the reasons I sought a traditional job with health care and so forth and so on. And she was going to school and didn't want to leave the school she was at. And family was here, so she felt more comfortable. And I really didn't mind necessarily being here. But it didn't have anything to do, to answer your question.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I get that. I wanted to also talk about the disparity between the cultural atmosphere in Cleveland and the cultural atmosphere in Detroit. And it seemed from what you were saying that atmosphere in Detroit is a lot more conducive to collaboration and camaraderie than it is in Cleveland. Do you have any ideas about why that might be?
The only thing I can think of, it's just there are so many more opportunities. There's more people. There are more institutions. There's more community related art cachets or something like that. There's just more people. Not unlike New York. I mean, there's a lot more people. Because I think Cleveland, if I'm not mistaken, it doesn't have that many more people than Akron. It just happens to appear to be a much larger city. And at the time, I think Detroit, because this was in the early 2000s, I think Detroit was twice the size of Cleveland. And of course, Chicago, is much, much larger.
Yes. Well, what we've seen in Cleveland is a gradual population decline, which is why we have fewer wards in Cleveland. We just shrank to 15. So there's been a certain brain drain, but I can recall being a news reporter back in the 80s, and back then Cleveland was like the 10th major market. But now, as you just mentioned, the population is not much more than the population of the city of Akron. But another thing that I have observed, based on conversations that I've had with others in the artist community, is that there seems to be more of a crabs in the barrel type mentality here, as opposed to a place like Detroit or Atlanta, where you have really more of a spirit of, let's work together, let's collaborate, let's get this done. Here it seems as though
that's true.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, what would cause that mindset? Perhaps it's competition over the few funding opportunities that we have here. Perhaps it's just it's an aspect of just Cleveland reality. I don't know, but I often wonder about that.
It might be the first thing you mentioned, because the competition of funding, but it's not just funding, because that's not where all of the monies come from for artists or patrons. They just want to buy art. And the people who can afford art, then there's that as well. One of the things I'm excited about as far as going to Chicago, I know that there will be traditional collectors there. There are a lot of people who say they are collectors, but of course they collect art, but there's a different kind of collector. And that's the one, and there's just less of those here in Cleveland compared to Chicago, New York, for God's sake, and Atlanta. They're just less. And in Atlanta, as you're probably aware of, they have the largest concentration of black millionaires in the country. So those are factors. There's more money in those cities. It's just there's greater resources.
Yeah, I'd also have to imagine, just based on you saying that, is that People are a lot more conscious about the way they spend their money just because, we are characterized as one of the poorest cities in the nation, and, all these other categories that we lead in terms of dysfunction. So people don't necessarily see art as an investment, and they're less inclined to look at that painting on the wall and say to themselves, oh, wow, this is worth so much today. I wonder how much it will be worth in 10 or 15 or 20 years. So they're not looking at it as an investment. You've been able to expand beyond Cleveland, and you mentioned Detroit and you mentioned Chicago. Can you talk about how you were able to expand your horizon as an artist?
Well, it's the Midwest, I guess. Just doing some research, finding out, because I do a lot of research, even for the paintings. It may take me 6-7 months before I start a painting, but I've been researching it for 6 or 7 months. And I did some research about the art world, I guess, in Chicago. And I found a couple of galleries that were interested in what I was doing. So this will be the third time I've shown in Chicago, by the way. And that's one of the reasons. The other reason, for as far as Detroit goes, it's because I was dating someone there. One of the major reasons I spent time there. And we would go to galleries. We would go to a variety of places. We would go to, for instance, that when I mentioned Fox Theater and Three Tenors. There's just more culturally, as far as that goes, to do. So I gravitated toward that. I don't know if that answers your question about how I ended up expanding and personal in-house shows in Atlanta, where I could work in a van and drive to Atlanta to an exclusive house showing to sell artwork. And again, New York. I haven't been to New York quite a while, but when I was there, I did love that. I could just see how it might have been a little different.
Well, to me, it just has to be fulfilling and exciting to know that you're going to a place where people will see art and appreciate it and buy it. I mean, I have a gallery myself. I get very few inquiries on how they might obtain my work, so just to know that mindset even exists is kind of exciting to me. I would just have to imagine being in a place where my stuff would be hanging on the wall and folks would be coming up to me and saying, hey, I'd like to have that. Not that it doesn't happen, every once in a while.
Right. But
yeah.
What I would imagine as a photographer and an artist, you want your work to be appreciated, and you'd also like to be compensated.
Right.
For it.
Right.
Being an author as well, you want to be compensated for those things. My mindset has changed a little bit over the years. I mean, it's more inclined to what they did not teach me at either school about the business of art, how to find the customers that you're looking for. Because if there was a formula, everybody would do it. If there was one way to do it, you could just write that down and put a how to do book, like build a house. This is how you build this house. But there isn't. One of the things that is suggested as far as the traditional way from emerging to mid-career and so forth is to do the work and then show it in certain galleries, and then you get up to a higher scale gallery and so forth and so on. I'm not so interested in that. Plus, I don't have that kind of time. I have managed to sell work, much of it word of mouth, murals, interior murals in Chesterland and other places. I'm going to go back to doing work, pulling it off the wall at the Art Institute in Cleveland. By the way, I was accepted there. I just couldn't afford to go.
Mm-hmm.
There were people who had asked for caricature artists or sketch artists. So I would do parties, and I would do it by contract. I never, like at Cedar Point, you would walk up to me and pay me directly. Then I make the work. It was always the party planner or something like that would hire me to do that. Bar mitzvahs, company picnics, doctors' dinners, a variety of stuff. That's when I was pretty much living on whatever I could do. So I hustled to do this, to make my ends meet. And I lived in a place that I could afford, which was the projects, Garden Valley. Behind Garden Valley, it's called Rainbow Terrace. So the rent was minimal, and I still just explored and did artwork. And again, never stopped doing that. And even when I was working for Meistergram Designs, I still had to hustle freelance and other things to make ends meet, because I had a wife and a young child at the time. So that's my story, I guess.
Yes.
There are other stories, and mine isn't unique. If I was talking to an artist, I cannot think of his name. He's a Hispanic man. And I know that he has some sculptures and some things at Metro Hospital. I think he has the, looks like giant tulips. And one of the interviews that he gave, he kind of crystallized it that there are a lot of artists that have to have another job in order to survive. Probably the majority of us. There are only so many, not unlike athletics, that rise to certain levels. And the good thing about it, how it differs from athletics, there's a larger window, so to speak. With athletics, you can only do that as long as you can be athletic. But I'm still encouraged. I'm actually very excited about what I'm doing right now, and more so than ever. I love the work I'm doing. It's freer. I don't necessarily have to worry about finances right now, which also frees some things up. But I finally came up with what a marketing plan is for me. It took a while, but that's what I'm excited about. And I sell work. I do a variety of things. So as you mentioned, the Taft Project, I've had murals before that, and I have upcoming commission of 5 figures coming up. So I think that at this point in my artistic career, of course, is not where I dreamed I would be, but it could be so much worse. So I'm thankful for that.
You describe yourself as an artist, a creative, and a visionary. And just a few moments ago, you mentioned a book that needs to be written. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say maybe you should write that book about the business of art.
Well, I would, but it would have to be from a very singular perspective, the business of art as it relates to me. Because I also said there's no formula, there's no cookie cutter. I've had my work critiqued at Ohio State and things like that, and there were one of the things I'll never forget that he said, the art critic, is that the reason he became an art critic instead of an artist is because it was so hard. to be an artist, and he couldn't make a living at it. I've heard that from a number of art teachers, because I think that everyone who goes to school to become an artist envisions themselves as making their living as this great artist. And then the reality sets in, well, I do need to eat. I may have a family coming up, so I've kind of gone in different directions with that. I have done that. I have lived exclusively off of my artwork, and didn't make a lot of money, but I didn't starve. Pretty close, but I did not starve, and I was not homeless. So there's that's a low bar for accomplishment, but even at that time, I sold more work than Van Gogh. So
yes, and it is an accomplishment, I would say. You mentioned the Transformative Art Fund, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about that experience. I took great pleasure in taking that trip to Philadelphia with you and the other artists who went to the City of Murals. Talk to us about what your experience was in visiting Philadelphia and seeing the expansive array of murals that they have there.
Well, it was a positive experience. Let me lead with that. I was glad I went for that reason as well, and just to visit Philadelphia. There is a however. The however is, and this is something I had hoped to bring to Taft Impact 216, is that the kinds of murals, or for lack of a better expression, the quality of them, I was surprised that some of them were not very good. And I know we didn't see all of them. Some were excellent. And again, these things are subjective. Some I thought were excellent, others not so good at all.
You're speaking of the murals in Philadelphia or the ones here?
The ones in Philadelphia.
Okay, that's what I thought.
You asked about the experience of that,
Yeah,
and that's what I recall. I enjoyed the trip. It was a positive experience, and sometimes you go to just look, and I can critique, and other people also. People will critique the work that we've done here. Mm-hmm. Some may like it, some may not. But I wanted to bring that experience of. I didn't want the mural that I had something to do with to fall short in my eyes. And there were a number of them I really liked, again, but there were a number, just as many, that I just didn't like at all.
Right. Talk about the importance of the Taft project itself.
Oh, yeah. Again, getting back to why I wanted to bring a particular experience of the mural here, I'm hoping that the Taft project as a whole and the Impact 216 selectively will continue. And there will be more murals and so forth and so on because of the work we've done. I do like the work that we did with Impact 216 compared to what I didn't like about what I saw in Philadelphia. I do think it's vibrant, colorful. We got nothing but compliments. I am mostly happy with the work, the particular one that I worked on. Or happy, satisfied, yeah. And I just hope that this will create some momentum so that this can continue. So there will be more of them. The building that I worked on, in particular, the young man who owns it, is also an inspiration because he bought the building because there was a time in his life where he lived in the building. It's depressed property now, but he intends to rehab it, not tear it down, and put some couple of businesses in it, as well as restore the apartments on top of it. So it will be part of the revitalization. And he likes the murals as well. He likes the mural on his building. He joked and said, "Now I got to fix the building because the mural looks so good." And we said, "Good, glad you like it. Just don't tear it down."
Yeah, right. Well, one of my concerns about the project itself is that it came from a funding source that was pretty much a one and done. And that trip to Philadelphia showed me that that city has a commitment to art and that they fund that program with $10 million a year, which is probably like, I don't know, 0.6% of their entire city budget. But one thing that I would really like to see is that Cleveland steps up and decides to appropriate a certain amount of money to go towards art and not just depend on ARPA dollars, because that's what it was. It was stimulus money. We asked for 10 million, we got 3, and then we came up with 6 or 7 projects that we funded, but we could have done so much more with so much more money. And of course, as you've seen, you know, that project that you participated in and the others have definitely had an impact. We have just a few more moments left in the broadcast, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to just capsulize the different things that you're involved in and the places people can go to see your work and witness your activism.
Well, obviously the mural, is on 140th and Kinsman. You can go to my website to see other works. You're welcome to visit my studio, as a matter of fact, to see other works. The projects that involve my facilitation are a little different. Again, you would have to go to the website to see those things, because the exhibitions were temporary. They weren't permanent fixtures. I guess what I'm trying to say is, mostly if you want to see my work, you'd have to go to my websites. And but you can always buy the book, and you can go to Amazon, Amazon, to buy that, to see one of my works, because that is actually who I am. It's just not that one dimension. I'm not just the visual artist. Discovered that I'm also a writer, and that's a way to get other messages out. But everything that I do is message oriented. I don't think I've ever, unless it was a class assignment, just decided to put a bowl of fruit on the table and render it, unless there was some meaning behind it. There would have to be something inherent why I did the bowl of fruit. What does that represent? Instead of just showing your skills to render. I'm not an academic artist, even though I have some training. I consider myself an outsider artist who does outsider work. But it's just, I'm appreciative of being able to express myself, and that I'm blessed enough to be able to be paid to do it.
Yes.
So that is a blessing.
All right. So you can go to rickeylewis.com, and it's RICKEY Lewis.com, and you can get a portal into the world of this great creative visionary artist that I'm having this conversation with. Thanks for joining me on Open Door today.
All right. Thank you. Thank you again for having me, Vince.
All right. And to those of you who are listening, you can catch this broadcast on my YouTube channel, and that's Vince Robinson. And you can listen to this podcast and others that I've done and some of the other shows that I do. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you can get updates and alerts for when I post new content. As always, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, make today your absolute best day. Peace.